Om Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kamarupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddhir Bhavatu Me Sada Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Lokashankaram Puranan Nyaya Mimamsa Dharma Shastranga Mishritaha Vedaha Sthanani Vidyanam Dharmasya cha Chaturdasha Ayurvedo Dhanurvedo Gandharvaschaiva te trayah Arthashastram Chaturdhantu Vidyaha Ashtadashaiva taha Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Namaste. I welcome everyone who has joined us today for this talk brought to you by INDICA Bhasha. This conversation is with Professor Rajnish Kumar Mishra, and he plans to share with us his assorted views today broadly on Bhāshā itself. So, assorted views on Bhāshā. A few words first about Professor Rajnish Kumar Mishra. He teaches at School of Sanskrit and Indic Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. His teaching and research areas involve Kashmir Shaivism, Buddhism, Sanskrit linguistics, Sanskrit poetics, Asian literature, philosophy of language, comparative poetics, and comparative religion. Dr. Mishra has been and is associated with national and international academic projects such as Encyclopedia of Hinduism, of which he was an associate editor back in 2010 itself. Encyclopedia of Indian Poetics, again as an editor, a UAI, UNESCO funded project of Sahitya Akademi in New Delhi, which is currently under publication. Towards Asian Poetics, an interface study of India, Korea, China, and Japan, 2016, Academy of Korean Foundation, Seoul, South Korea, and Indo-Irish Anthology. He has published a widely reviewed book titled Buddhist Theory of Meaning and Literary Analysis in 1999. He has published several research papers in national and international refereed journals and has also contributed chapters in the edited books and proceedings and has delivered invited lectures at multiple parts both in India and abroad. Dr. Mishra was awarded Okita Memorial Fellowship by Japan Foundation and the ICCR in 1998. The ICCR, that is Indian Council for Cultural Relations, and South Asian Institute, SAI, University of Heidelberg, Germany, had offered Dr. Mishra a very prestigious chair, just Professor Heinrich Zimmer Chair, for 2 years to teach Indian intellectual history. I can say more about Professor Mishra, but I will stop over here and welcome him to share his assorted views on Bhāshā. Welcome, Professor Mishra.
Namaskar to all of you, and particularly Meghji for inviting me on this platform to share my views, whatever I have been studying and thinking about this very, very central topic to our culture, Indian culture particularly. Bhāshā. First of all, let me begin with this verse, sort of Mangalacharana, you can say. Anadi nidhanam brahma shabda tattvam yadaksharam vivartate arthabhavena prakriya jagato yatah. This is the first verse of Bhartrihari's Vakyapadiye. It begins with this verse. And why it is important to talk about language with reference to Indian culture is because this is the culture that developed the philosophy of Shabda, and it is enumerated as one of the philosophical systems in India. I refer to a work by Sri Madhavacharya, a Vedanta scholar, Sarvadarshan Sangrah. In that text, it's like a compendium of Indian philosophical systems. So in that text, the 13th chapter he has named as Panini Darshanam. Panini Darshanam, philosophy of Panini, literally. That means that language has acquired the status of philosophy in our culture. And since he is naming this chapter as Panini Darshanam, and Panini belongs to 7th century BC, so you can see the antiquity and the kind of sustained thinking about language, various aspects of language, philosophical as well as other, linguistic features in this culture right from the beginning. And it doesn't begin with Panini, in fact. The source is there in the Vedic Agamic texts. So from Vedic Agamic times till the date, India has a sustained, rich and continuous tradition of language thinking. But before we come to this concept of tradition of thinking about language, let me tell you something about the word Parampara itself, Bhāshā Chintan ki Parampara. So Parampara literally means Param Para, Param plus Para, right? It shows continuity and cumulativeness. So whatever is coming down is assimilated, and then the Acharya compose his or her text further. To understand this term Parampara, we may refer to the concept of what Panini has discussed in the case of euphonic combination Sandhi. We'll take 3 terms from him to understand the meaning of this word. Parampara has 3 aspects: Agam, Lop and Vikar. Though these terms are used by Panini in a different context, in the context of euphonic combination, but these are pertinent here also. So first of all, Agam, something is added. It is not something which is stagnant and as it is. So something is added in course of time. Then something becomes non-visible also. Adarshanam lopa. The concept of lopa doesn't mean that that object is non-existential now, or the object is no longer there. It is very much there, but in hibernation. It will surface as time comes. So nothing is lost, first of all, in this parampara. And the third thing is modification, vikara. So parampara accommodates itself in course of time. So these 3 things make it a living object, and it never becomes irrelevant. You might have seen the tradition of Tika Parampara in the culture. With every commentary, Tika is a type of commentary. In fact, in Sanskrit, there are several types of commentary: Panjika, Vartik, Bhāshya, Samiksha, Tika. So around 10 types of commentaries are there. In English, we don't have word for all of them. So with each commentary, the text gets recontextualized, it gets renewed, and around the seminal text, you have the continuous tradition of commentary. So this is how it goes on. It is not like something which is stagnant, or which has no life, or it is not flowing. So first of all, this. Second thing is that parampara is always bound to its source. It is never separated. And again, from taking a sutra from Panini, we can understand. You might have studied these case principles, case theories, and there he says that in case of apadan, separation, in English it is called ablative case. So in case of ablation, Panini says that fifth vibhakti can be used from the source. For example, vrikshat patrani patanti. Okay, leaves are falling from the tree. So there is a separation from the source. Tree is the source. Leaves are falling from there. So in the source, the fifth case may be applied. So vrikshat, the word becomes vrikshat. But you know, this kind of separation is perennial. Leaves are no longer part of the tree, and leaves will never go back to the tree. It's a perennial separation. Parampara is not in this sense. Another sutra will help us to understand the notion of parampara. Bhuvah prabhavah. This is the sutra from Panini, again explaining this ablation. So example is the Ganga flows from the Himalayas. So there is also a separation. Ganga is separating from Himalaya or flowing from Himalaya, but that doesn't mean Ganga is separated from the Himalayas. The source is still Himalaya. It is not separated, flowing in another direction, but perennially bound to its source. In this sense, the word parampara is to be used. So in the context of language thinking, you'll see that the source, which is Veda and Agam texts, these are always there. The tradition derives its inspiration from those source texts also, or develop the notions which are there. So in this long tradition of language thinking, right from the Vedic times, Agamic times, Veda and Agamas are full of innumerable references to language, and various insights are there. If you will take up in this talk. So why suddenly you will see in Europe also language become a very central theme in Western intellectual tradition as well. A period around 1960s is generally designated as the linguistic turn. So linguistic turn means that everything is now being discussed from the point of view of language in the West also. But surprisingly, West has no sustained continuous tradition of language thinking. Even if you add ancient Greek philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, you won't find much deliberation on language. Plato simply talks about noun and verb, though these two are very fundamental categories in language, but there is no analysis of language. So just two categories, and preposition is added by Aristotle, and then you have the whole few centuries gap, and then the Port Royal grammarians come, and then again there is gap, and then modern times when Europe gets introduced to Indian thought systems. So this is how it happens. Now, what I am suggesting, that linguistics as a modern discipline is India's contribution to the world. It is if you name a few linguists, first generation linguists in the West, they all acknowledge. For example, W.S. Allen, J.R. Firth, Henry Sweet, Leonard Bloomfield. Go through their works, Trubetskoy. They all have great admiration, great praise for the kind of study of language Indian minds have done. And one of the Indologists like J.F. Stall, he has written a beautiful article, and this is Sanskrit Philosophy of Language. The title is Sanskrit Philosophy of Language. Is edited there in Current Trends in Linguistics, Volume 5. You can see that. And he begins with this observation that Indian mind is obsessed with language and philosophy. Indian mind is obsessed with language and philosophy. So that is to highlight the place of these two disciplines. And surprisingly, language has become a philosophy in our culture, you know. So, at that time, during colonial time, a word was very prevalent, and the word was discovery. That Europe was discovering so many things, and in that way, William Jones discovered Sanskrit, as it is said. William Jones discovered Sanskrit. So new routes, new lands, new resources, they were all being discovered from the European point of view, of course. So this term was so prevalent, so common at that time, that some of the Indians also attempted to discover India, discovery of India or so. It happened. But as W.S. Allen says, that the credit goes to William Jones, who discovered Sanskrit for us. And without this discovery, without this acquaintance with Sanskrit, it would not have been possible for us to have the 19th century European thought on language. So these are the things. And in fact, one of the philosophers, Gilbert Ryle, says that language has become an occupational disease for the 20th century philosophers. Language acquired such a central space in European thought. But Europe has no such tradition. It was greatly inspired by Indian thought. And, Europe had this Renaissance in 14th century, when the source of Renaissance was not Europe. It was Greece, ancient Greece. And ancient Greece was not a part of this European ethos. It was deliberately made around 14th century itself. And if we believe Trotman, who says that Europe experienced the second Renaissance also, and that was largely because of Sanskrit thought, Indian thought systems. So this is how it goes on. But India has a sustained tradition of language thinking, study of language, various aspects of language. Almost all the aspects have been covered. So right from the beginning, you see Vedic agamic sources are there, and they are full of references, full of insights. In the limited time, we won't be able to do too much about them. But Vedic sources, and then comes the age of three munis, three sages, Panini, Katyayana, and Patanjali. And there you see, even before Panini, tradition was there, and Panini himself records 10 grammarians in his Ashtadhyaya itself. And before him, the major work is that of Yask's Nirukta and Nighantu. These are the twin texts. They deal with the Vedic etymology, Vedic words and their etymology, because there was a debate at that time. Yask is around 9th century BC. So Yask records this debate in his Nighantu and Nirukta, that some scholars like Kots are saying that Vedic hymns are meaningless. There is no meaning as such in the Vedic texts. They are just, they have the phonetic form, but there is no meaning as such. Now, Yask, as an etymologist, takes this challenge, and he first lists those Vedic words which are difficult to understand in his time. Language change. This is the natural process. So by that time, some Vedic terms might have become opaque, might have become, might have been used in different sense, the way it was not used in the Vedic texts. So such deviations cause difficulties in interpreting and understanding the texts. And Yask took this challenge. He first enumerated those Vedic words which are opaque or not much frequent, and then gives the etymology. he develops the principle of etymology, nirvachan. We call it nirvachan, not exactly etymology, but nirvachan, reducing or tracing the word to its verbal root. And from there, the words are systematically derived. And you know, Sanskrit verbal roots are generally polyvalent Sanskrit verbal roots. And this is the task of the etymologist or the interpreter, that which meaning is being established there. Since the verbal roots have different meanings, so in a particular context, a particular meaning will prevail. So this is the general principle of interpretation. So pre-Panini and then Panini, Katyayana and Patanjali, we have from 7th century to 150 BC, 700 BC to 150 BC. So this is the very, very important phase in language study, because three great grammarians you have: Panini, his Ashtadhyay, and Vartika of Katyayana, and Mahabhashya of Patanjali. Now, this is very important because in Mahabhashya particularly, you have the foundational grammatical theory of Panini. Particularly in his in the first chapter of Mahabhashya, Patanjali discusses a general theory of language. And basic concepts are discussed there: the purpose of grammar, what is Shabda, and what is the method of description of Shabda in grammar, like this. And beautiful definition of Shabda you will come across there in Mahabhashya of Patanjali. So, Atha Shabdanushashanam, Kesham Shabdanam, Lokikanam, Vedikanam cha. This is how it begins. So, Kesham, since grammar is a kind of discipline of words, you know, the etymological meaning of grammar has nothing to do with Vyakaran. Grammar etymologically means writing. It has nothing to do with the analysis of language. This definition Europe learned only in the 18th, 19th century. You know, that grammar means analysis of language. There is no science of analysis of language so far West is concerned. You know, grammar is just imitative. You have parts of a speech, and then you put words in these 8 categories, and then I just give you an example. In Sanskrit, from verbal root ram to ram, ram to ramah, the whole process is discussed by the etymologists and by the grammarians. You know, ram, from ram, verbal root, to ram, substantive, pratipadik, and from pratipadik ram to rama, that is nominative, first singular masculine nominative case, it is derived, and there are rules involved in deriving ram from rama. No English grammar or Anglo-Saxon grammar can explain what are the rules to transform from a substantive to a usable grammatical form, Rama. So this is the analysis of language. So Ashtadhyay and other. So what kind of words? Vedic words and Laukic words. Kesham Shabdanam, Laukikanam, Vedikanam cha. What kinds of words are being dealt with here? Words which are used in the Vedic texts, compositional texts, and those which are common. This creates lots of confusion these days, that people say that the Vedic words were never used. No, you cannot cite even a single example in the world in which literature has been composed in a language which was not used by the people at that time. You know, it is just impossible. So Vediki is the name given by Patanjali for that language which is used in the Vedic texts, and maybe from that time language has deviated, and the prevalent form, common form, is known as Laukiki. Okay, so Vediki and Laukiki, in fact, they are not in opposition. They every language has these two forms: compositional form, that is Vedic form, and the form which is generally used by the people. The English language in Eliot's poetry is English, but that English is not used by the common people. You know, Eliot would not have been speaking himself that language of his four quartets or Westland, the kind of language which is used there. But it is English, but it is a compositional form. Okay, so this is the difference between Vediki and Laukiki, and Ashtadhyayi takes note of both that. And here Patanjali gives us the most beautiful definition of Shabda. Shabda is Yeno charitena, you see, that which is articulated. Yeno charitena kakodukhur vishaninam sampratyo bhavati sa shabdah. So that which when articulated brings the cognition of the object in hearer's mind is Shabda. Yeno charitena sasna langul kakodukhur vishaninam sampratyo bhavati sa shabdah. This is Patanjali's definition of Shabda. So it brings cognition of the object when it is articulated. One can stop here and think that what is word here? Word is not that which we have heard. Patanjali says that word is there in the mind. That word is articulated through the vocal organs. So by word he means those mental words which are here in our mind. And that word is articulated and manifested by the vocal organs. So in the grammarian tradition, word is called Nitya. Shabd is Nitya, not the articulated word, but that word which is articulated. Word is that which is articulated. So this is the subtle difference. And then you have from Patanjali to Bhojraj, 11th century, and there you will see that extension of linguistic thinking into philosophy and literary theory. So philosophical texts of language were also composed, like Vakyapadiya of Bhartrihari and many more. And then poeticians also contributed a lot in explaining the various dimensions of language, literary dimensions of language. And there you have the notion of Shabda Shakti, Abhidha, Lakshana, Vyanjana, suggested meaning, Dhvani, Kavya, Riti, Vaprokti. In fact, our literary theories are basically linguistic theories. Take, for example, Alankar school, Riti school, Vakrokti school, Dhvani school. All these are basically rooted in language. And it became possible because of the grammarians. Grammarians had worked already, so it was easier for the poeticians to take it further. And then from Bhojraj to Ramchandra Gunachandra, you have 12th century, and from Ramchandra Gunachandra to Nagesha Bhatta, that is 18th century, 17th, 18th century. And in the 18th century also you have a philosophical texts, philosophy of language text like Paramlangu Manjusha, Vyakaran Siddhant Manjusha, and many more like that. And this is the phase of simplification of the rules of Ashtadhyayi. So Ashtadhyayi is a grammar for the linguists. It's called grammarian's grammar. The same grammar was transformed into a pedagogical grammar in Prakriya tradition. So you have Lagu Siddhant Kaumdi, Madhya Siddhant Kaumdi, Siddhant Kaumdi, like that. You have graded text for the for teaching language as well. And then we come to the modern period, and the domain of Sanskrit is now expanded, not within the boundary of India, but beyond that, through this colonial phase. So this is how it goes on. Now the question is that why did our acharyas paid so much attention to language. You see, language is a very tricky object, very, very tricky object. And since our knowledge is constituted in language, it is important to study the nature and characteristics of language itself. So, to what extent language is a reliable means of, containing or enshrining, knowledge, and to what extent it is a medium for expressing that knowledge, so that there will be no ambiguity, there is no deviation. So such aspects have been studied, and that's why it has been studied from the point of view of physics as well as from the point of view of metaphysics. It has been studied ontologically. It has also been studied epistemologically. So major philosophical systems in India devote a considerable section of their writing, their shastras, in discussing language. For example, Buddhists, they came up with a fantastic theory of meaning called apohvad. Grammarians' theory of meaning is called Sphotvad. Mimamsakas, Abhihitanvayvad, Anvitabhidhanvad. And these are the theories. And similarly, in Nyaya also we have Tatparyavritti and so. Here, we would like to highlight a few dimensions of language. First of all, we need to think that categories of language or grammatical categories are also the categories of thought and reality. So this relationship is to be understood. Grammatical categories, for example, you have 4 parts of speech as per Sanskrit thought. Naam, Akhyat, Upsarga, Nipat. Naam is noun, Akhyat is verb, then Upsarga, let us say prefix or affix, and then Nipat, indeclinables. These are the 4 categories of Shabda. In the same fashion, we can see these categories, we can apply these categories to understand the knowledge of our reality. Reality is not beyond this as such. So we perceive object, and we also perceive in which state that object is. So Bhav Pradhan and Sattva Pradhan, this is how Yask also defines Bhav Pradhan, Akhyat, that is verb, and Sattva Pradhan is noun. So these are the categories of language, and similarly case inflections, 7 cases. So when a verb or action, a verb represents action in reality. So when an action takes place, it configures in 7 dimensions, and these are the 7 cases, like that. Second, that language is a rule governed entity, right from phonetics to the discourse. At every level, language is a rule governed entity. Generally said that language is constituted of the arbitrary signs. Okay, signs are arbitrary. There is no logic why an object is called tree or why an object is called table. There is no logic, of course. So at this stage, language is arbitrary. But once this relationship is established, once we named that object, now it is no longer arbitrary. And that's why Vartikar Katyayan says that Siddhe Shabdartha Sambandhe, 3 things are established. Word is established, object is established, and the relationship between the two is also established. So Siddha Shabdartha Sambandha. Once we name that object, that relationship is established. So language is a rule governed entity. Language, for example, in our alphabet system, in every alphabet system, language selects a few sounds, speech sounds, not all the sounds which can be produced by throat. So a selection of speech sounds, and then its combination, which combination or sequence of a speech sound is allowed in a particular language. This is called sound pattern of that language. Language restricts there also. And then formation of words, suffix, prefix, infix, all these things, all these inflectional and derivational processes. And then in syntax also, there is a rule to form sentences, and similarly discourse and everything. So language is a rule governed entity from at all its levels. Grammar or Vyakaran, as I was saying that Vyakaran and grammar are not synonymous. Vyakaran means Vyakriyante Vipadyante Shabdena Anini iti, through which the analysis of word is made possible. So it's basically a science of analysis. You know, Vyakaran is essentially a science of analysis. That's why it is said that Paniyam Kanadam cha Sarva Shastro Pakarakam, that discipline of Panini and Kana logic. That is, these two are like grammar and logic are like the meta science, meta disciplines. These are helpful to understand other shastras also. So Vyakaran is an exposition of these inherent structures or rules. Okay, you see, language functions on the principle of economy. So it selects speech sounds. Not all speech sounds are selected in a particular code or language. A specific selection from the environment of the sounds, speech sounds, and then formation of words. You know, as I suggested, that Sanskrit verbal roots are polyvalent. It means language shows the principle of economy. With single set of words, limited set of words, you can explain a number of things. And so is grammar. Grammar also functions on the principle of economy. Grammatical rules are few, but they can explain the whole range of linguistic expression of that language. Think of Ashtadhyay, around 400 sutras are there, but they explain all the possible expressions which are possible through Sanskrit language. So, and in language, you have the class property, common noun. A single word takes care of all the common objects, universal objects there. For example, the word tree explains us all the trees in the world, future, present, and past, all. So it's a principle of economy. And then you have Shabda Shakti also, Shabda Shakti, Avidha, Lakshana, and Vyanjana. Through Lakshana and Vyanjana, the same word express implied meaning as well as suggested meaning. So language shows the principle of economy. With handful of words, with handful of rules, we can explain a number of things. And this is the competence of grammar also, that a few general rules may explain a large variety of expressions available in that language. Friends, you see that language is basically a process of naming. It names object, it names experiences, whatever, internal or external. By naming, Upanishad says that the world is Nam Rupatmak, Nam Rupatmakam Jagat. The world is constituted of name and form. But by name, we don't mean simply that pasting some name somewhere. No, it's a mental process. Language is naming. Naming is a mental process, cognitive process. Once the object is named, the object becomes the part of our conceptual world. So it is possible for us to think about the object when it is present before us physically, when it is not present before us physically, as well as sometimes when the object is non-existent. Even then we can think about it in language. Then comes that language is a medium of thinking, not just a medium of communication. So this was the understanding right from the beginning in our culture, that the very cognitive act cannot be performed without language. language is such an important aspect. What makes it interesting is that language is symmetrical as well as asymmetrical with reality. In language, we have name, and then accordingly, we have objects in reality. Up to this stage, it is fine. But what happens sometimes that we do have words, but we have no corresponding object. Here we are in problem. So for example, you have a word tree, and then there is an object also in the word. But think of examples like sky flower, horned tiger, a rabbit's horn. You have word, we have word, but we don't have the corresponding object in reality. What is suggested is that language creates a kind of heterocosm, a reality of its own. So these things made it interesting and essential also for study. Second, another aspect is that language reveals reality as well as hides reality. So for example, you see, hides reality. In reality, objects are in constant change, perennial change. But once we name that object, it seems reality is frozen. It is fixed. So this is how language creates, a kind of barrier also. And it creates a difference where there is no difference. For example, there is no difference ontologically between water, waves, froth, bubbles. But we see we have different names. Bubble, froth, ripples. These are not different from water, but we have given different names to these forms, and they appear different from water. So there is no difference, but it created difference. And wherever there is actual difference, it hides the difference also. So for example, no two trees are same in all the dimensions, but yet we call them as tree. So differences is overlapped. So all such things makes it a very, very interesting subject for a study. And I just take 1, 2, and then I'll stop, and then we'll have some questions. Language is a focusing device, focusing mechanism. Through name, we focus our attention. It helps us to concentrate on that particular object which is being named. And that's why in our culture, you have the tradition of naam japne ki parampara pratha hai. So through names, we try to focus ourselves on that particular object. You see, we have a tradition of 1,000 names for a deity, Shiva Sahasranam, Vishnu Sahasranam, and many more. I have collected around 29 such Sahasranam. So by these 1,000 names, we are conceptualizing, visualizing that entity in its totality. Each name has a specific focus of it focuses on the specific aspect of that deity or that object. So naam jap, to capture reality, to capture that object in its totality. And through this, we conceptualize and we experience that object. And next is language is both mantra as well prapancha. This is the culture that teaches us philosophical aspect of language. This is the only culture in the world that says that language is an object of meditation. is समाधि की वस्तु है भाषा, चिंतन की वस्तु है भाषा, समाधि की वस्तु है. We can reflect upon, meditate upon language. So in that way, the whole cosmos is created through Nada Brahma, So this is the, and language is both mantra as well as prapancha, that each sound, it is not the speech sound only articulated by our vocal organs, but this speech sound has ontological status, and our Tantra texts has a detailed discussion on this. Mantras are formed in these basic fundamental speech sounds, and that's why it is called a bija mantra, bij, seed, that manifests in this kind of cosmos. So bhasha is mantra. In this aspect, language doesn't refer to anything outside, because there is nothing outside this mantra. You have devata, you have mantra. Devata resides in that mantra, that mantra. So you have rishi, you have devata, you have vinyog, all such associated related terminology you have. So language becomes a swayat, self-contained entity when it is in the form of mantra. You see, the language which we speak, it comes from within, comes from within. When we do not speak, we are in communion with our own self. Language merges in our, consciousness within us. And when we have desire, it manifests. So this is Pashyanti Madhyama Vaikhari form of language. And language is also prapancha. Prapancha has two different connotations. One is to explain, and another meaning is to hide itself. When language describes objects outside, then in that way, it hides itself. The mantra aspect is concealed, and then by concealing itself, language explains the world outside. This is the prapancha aspect of language. So these are some of the observations which I wanted to share with learned friends like you. Thank you very much. My namaskar to all of you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mishra. What a sweeping exposition on the topic of Bhāshā. You covered so many different aspects, traditions, not tradition alone, but traditions. You have covered ontology, epistemology, some aspects of philosophy of language as applicable to India. You have, in my view, asserted with a very brief comparative analysis, but substantiated with evidence on why India, major contribution to the world, at least one of the major contributions to the world, is linguistics. There is a lot that you packed in to this roughly 45-minute talk that you have given. For people who have not studied formally Bhāshā, this, I think, would be a wonderful introduction to the sort of map of different things related to Bhāshā, which they can dive deeper into. I thank you for taking time out and for sharing this perspective with us. Very rich historical, philosophical perspective on Bhāshā. And we look forward to having you back again on INDICA Bhasha on topics that you would like to share your views on to a non-specialist audience who would like to understand more things about Indic as well as Bhāshā. Thank you so much again, Dr. Mishra, for making time on the weekend and sharing your perspectives. Namaste.
Grateful to you, Megji, and all the learned participants who are there. Thank you. Namaskar.
Namaste.